Any questions? Yeah. So, do you have any questions from what we covered? Okay. Well, let's take up something new. We'll practice a little bit, and then we'll return to our story for the rest of the day. So.
So if you said I have many questions, but I don't know how to ask.
Well.
How to say that.
Well, don't worry about being polite. Just ask them anyway. Yeah. Seriously, do you have questions? No? You don't. I mean, you don't have to worry about being polite to me. You can ask me any way you want to. And also, anytime I stand in front of the projector and you can't see, just ask a direct question. What do you? Yeah. That's okay. Because I'm a big man, I cover up a lot of space. You know.
Can I say you are on the way my side? Can I say that?
I say what?
You are on the way my side.
Oh, you are in my way.
You are in my way.
Yeah, I would say, like if I'm standing here and I'm saying, okay, now Chop, I'd like you to read for me what's on the board, and you can't. You would say, I'm sorry, but you are in my way. If you wanted to be polite, you know, yeah, Now, if you just said you are in my way, that would be assertive. That would be assertive. But if you said I'm sorry, but you are in my way, then that tells me that you would like to read what's on the board, but you are unable to because I'm standing in your way. You see the difference? An assertive way of saying it would be, if I ask you to read what's on the board and you can't, if you just said, would you read what's on the board, and then you said you are in my way, well, that would be a little, not necessarily rude, but certainly assertive. So you'd want me to understand, because see, I just wasn't thinking. You'd want me to understand that you want to read what's on the board, but you're unable to because I'm in your way. So you'd say, yes, but I can't, you are in my way. Or, I'm sorry, but you are in my way. And that's a polite way of telling me, okay, I'll just get out of your way. So, and that happens a lot. You know, it's a small room. You know.
No need to say, sorry, you are in my way.
Yeah.
Would you please move a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah. That would. Well, if I said read what's on the board, you could say yes, but could you please move a little? And then I would say, oh, sure. Yeah. That would be another polite way of saying it. Yeah. Or you could, if you wanted to be rude, you could just say, get out of the way. But you know, what happens is when you are assertive and when you're rude to someone, all it does is make the other person not want to change. You know, so you usually can make more progress if you're polite with people. You know, that's been my experience. Okay, so am I in your way right now? Okay.
Right now.
Ought to, shouldn't, have to, don't have to. Let's learn about the proper way to use these terms and sometimes the improper way. Am I in anybody's way right now? Okay. Okay, we use ought to, should, and shouldn't when we want to give advice. When we want to give advice. We want to give someone, we're trying to help someone understand something. We're wanting to give advice. So, if you had a friend who was not on Facebook, and you wanted them to be on Facebook, you thought they would have fun, they would learn things, they could connect with people. You want to give someone advice to open a Facebook account. We could say, you ought to get on Facebook. That is the same thing, it's the same statement as saying, my advice to you is to get on Facebook. You ought to. You should get on Facebook. Very same thing. Should means the same as ought to. It's advice. Or we could make it negative. If we wanted to give someone advice to not get on Facebook, we would say, you shouldn't. Or if we wanted to tell someone that they ought to be on Facebook, but they're afraid to because of, I don't know, security issues or something, we could say, you shouldn't be afraid to use Facebook. In each case, what we're doing is giving advice to someone. Now, this is a positive way of giving advice. You ought to. In English, in modern speech, there's no negative form of that. There's no way of saying ought not to. But going back not that long ago, maybe 50 years ago, maybe 100 years ago, you would see, and so if you're reading an older book, you know, like a novel or something that was written 100 years ago, or even when I was young and growing up, I mean, I'm an old man now, but when I was young and growing up, I would hear people say, and I would say, you ought not to be afraid to get on Facebook. You could see, this is positive, this is negative. We very rarely, in modern speech, have a negative form of ought to. But when I was young, and maybe 50 years ago or 100 years ago, you would see ought not to, and the contraction. Oh, here it is. The contraction, ought to, ought not to. The contraction was oughtn't to. But it's not incorrect. It's not incorrect. But if you use that in speech, like if you went to Canada or Australia or America and you use that, people would think it's old, it's archaic. We don't use it today. But you will see it in a book that was written maybe 50 years ago, 100 years ago. But for your everyday conversation, I would not suggest using it. Okay? But you will see it positive. It's used a lot. It's used very commonly to make a positive statement, to give advice. You ought to get on Facebook. You should get on Facebook. You shouldn't be afraid to get on Facebook. Okay? We're giving advice with these words. Now, if we want to show that something is necessary, that it's not just advice, but you really need to do this. I mean, you have to do this. It's a necessity. Then we use have to or has to. When I went to Cambodia, the airport I used was Don Mueang. And there was no way to get there except by taxi. There's no Song Dao that went there. I think probably I could have taken the bus there, but I didn't know how to do it. The only way to get there was by taxi. I asked the man at the Maryknoll office. I said, "How do I get to Don Mueang?" And he said, "You have to take a taxi." I had no choice. It was necessary to take a taxi. There was no choice in the matter. So when we're using the pronoun you, we say have to. If I'm using the pronoun I would say have to. If I'm using the pronoun they, I would say have to. If I'm using the pronoun he or she, I would say has to. And it means when we're giving advice and we use have to or has to, it means it's necessary. There's no choice. If I want to make it optional, if I want to give the meaning that it's just advice that a person has the choice, then see, I'm in the way. See, Nat could have asked me to move, and then I could have come over here, but then I would have been in suraphet's way. So, I could just get down here like this. I'll do that. Okay, but see, this is optional. This is optional. It's advice. It's advice. But this, there's no option. It's necessary. Okay. Now, if we want to show the lack of necessity, we would say doesn't have to or don't have to. And again, whether we use doesn't have to or don't have to depends upon which pronoun we're using. So they don't have to leave until next week. Yeah,